Folks, it's Steve Wilmes and Matt Keaton. We're here with another episode of the Risk Control Show. What's going on, Matt?
Partying as always.
Yeah, I think you keep wearing the same thing. I don't know. I mean, like I said in the OSHA 10 and 30 hour podcast, people got to look at you the whole time. You should at least dress it up a little bit,
Well, I mean, I got these two orange shirts from you, and they're fantastic. I just keep rotating through, throwing them in the wash, and they're not even fading, Steve.
Yeah, I'm wearing the same thing too. Well, today we're going to talk about fall protection and the upcoming update in California. And then, believe it or not, there's been a movement. Is it Arizona? Arizona is, they're like, hey, let's abolish OSHA. And then they announced that at the federal level too. One of the senators like, hey, I want to put in a bill to abolish OSHA. So let's talk about all that. What's the update on fall protection, Matt?
Well, California, so this is going to go into place on July 1st, 2025, so just in a few months right here. They made, I'd say it's pretty sweeping changes to the set of standards. Keep in mind that the fall protection standards it touches upon several different standards depending on the work that you're working on.
The update is touching on several of the fall protection standards
right.
itself.
Right. So when you boil it down, first of all, the first thing I would point out on that, and one that stands out to me, is that if you look at the current standards, you'll come to realize that there are all sorts of different fall height requirements depending on what you're doing. So if you're doing general industry work, it's 4 feet. If you're doing construction work, it's 6 feet or 7.5 feet over rebar. If you're doing framing, it's 15 feet. If you're connecting steel, I believe it's 15 feet, and then it's 30 feet. It's 30 feet or 15 feet. Then there's one that's a 20-foot standard as well. I think that's for roofing. There's all sorts of different height levels depending on what kind of job task you're performing. So the standard is changing all that and essentially eliminating a lot of those different heights so that you don't have to be confused anymore. It's going to be 6 feet for construction and 4 feet for general industry. So that's going to, now there's still going to be like an exception here or there, but most of it is going to 6 feet, which, Steve, I think that's sensible. You point this out all the time. What's the difference between falling from 6 feet or 15 feet? You're still going to get hurt. 15 feet, of course. Why should you be able to work at 15 feet with no fall protection, conventional fall protection in place? And you're still, if you fall 50 feet, you're still going to suffer that fall, right? So why is that different? It's something we've had conversations about. Like, that's interesting that they have that in place. So that's something that's going on here.
Because as I've always said, all these regulations are simply arbitrary. They're made up because someone has a knee-jerk reaction. If you go way back, I think I had a podcast that I did. We're talking years and years, maybe a decade ago, when the trucks were coming down the 2 highway and like a truck crashed. And then they were like, oh, we're going to close this off to all trucks. After one accident? Okay. There's no, where's the analysis in this stuff? And I think that's what they're getting to now. After 50 years of craziness.
Yeah,
it's like if the human body falls, what is the height at which it's dangerous? Why is it 4 feet in general industry and 6 in construction? If I fall 4 feet, are you saying that people that work in general industry are wimpier? They have more brittle bones? They're more of a snowflake? I mean, are the guys in construction are just that much tougher? You know, you know. So if you're a structural steel guy and you can work at 20 feet, but if you're a roofer at 15, oh man, I mean, I want the body of a structural steel guy. I, at what point I can't even hear you laugh. I mean, your microphone. Uh, but at what point is it actually dangerous to the body?
Yeah. Look, one stat that we throw out a lot in our training is quite pertinent here, and that is if you fall 11 feet or more, 80% of those falls, the falling individual suffers either a fatality, they die, or a major serious injury.
Yeah, absolutely. And so then you go like, where's that safe falling? I mean, I fell 3 feet and really scratched myself up. You you can be in a bar fight and hit your head and die. You
Mm-hmm.
know, so why can you fall 6 feet, 15, 20, 30? What who makes this stuff up? Well,
Right.
it's the industry groups that go in and say, hey, we need to be able to work. Like I get the framing piece if you have certain widths, you know, it's access fall protection, but you know, 15 feet is a long way.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I just look at this and I go, well, it's about time. It's going to cause a lot of problems for a lot of folks in industry because you're going to
Yep.
have to buy a lot of harnesses. You're going to have anchor points. You got a lot of training to do. Not that it's not needed. I mean, falls are still one of the leading causes of death. That's why it's part of that OSHA 10 and 30 Focus 4, which spends so much time on falls.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important. I'm glad to see some consistency across some of these standards. I just go like, what else are we missing in these? You
Right.
know, when you look at all these other areas, like what else are we missing?
Right.
Are we objective or are we subjective? And that's kind of, I think those are the things where, you know, the second part of this or second piece of this podcast is, you know, the senators that are trying to abolish OSHA. Well, why are they trying to abolish a great federal and state program that Nixon put in place in 1970? Why would they want to do that, Matt? Because you get all this subjective craziness. And it again, like if you have been listening to our podcast, you could probably predict what I'm going to say right now. If you go to Japan and you ask 10 people that work at a company the same question, you get one answer. You go to the United States and you ask 10 people at a company a question, you get 10 different, maybe even 15 different answers, depending on who the hell, from one person, depending on who you are.
Right.
You know? And you're just like, what is going on? Well, that's what happens in OSHA. You know, you got this inspector that comes out and says, oh, this trench, your ladder needs to be within touching distance of your employee. No, the standard says 25 feet. So you're just going to make something up? Like, you don't even know the standard. And you're an inspector.
Right.
And then you go, oh, you know, I remember having this thought way back when. One of my old colleagues, he's in construction, right? He's a safety guy for construction. I got to call him today. Anyway, he called me and he said, hey, do you ever do the VPP program? And I'm like, yeah, I used to do it all the time for clients back in Nebraska. And to start that whole process, I have a certification, much like you, Matt. You have the OSHA 10 and 30. I have a lifetime designation on the ASC, which is Advanced Safety Certificate. It was a 2-week program through National Safety Council, and it went through a lot of stuff like you went through for, you know, to become an instructor. Point being is, back then you sat in a class, you had a textbook this thick, you had like 3 of them, and you went through and you read all this, and you had to read standards, and I mean, it was grueling. It was really intense. And my old boss said, hey, you know what? why don't you call out Cal OSHA consultation? Not Cal OSHA. Why don't you call out OSHA consultation? This is in Nebraska. Call out OSHA consultation. Back then, we had an IIPP standard. We also were really in tune with NFPA 70E for arc flash hazards. And I remember I was in Nebraska for 6 years. I come out to California because California's number one. We do everything right out here, man. We're the best at everything. And so I went to work for a big insurance firm, and the insurance firm was like, I said, where's your arc flash stuff for the guys that are down here doing electrical work? Arc flash, what's that? I'm like, been in existence for a decade, dude. It was, Cal OSHA had nothing around, and I'm like,
Wow.
you're leading the charge. No, I think Nebraska's leading the charge. So my old boss down in Nebraska said, go call Cal OSHA and not Cal OSHA, called OSHA consultation, have them come out and go through an audit and just see, what's involved, so you have a better understanding. I'm like, cool. So the OSHA consultation guy comes out, he says, hey, you need to have this and this and this. And I'm like, standard doesn't say that. The standard says it's optional. He's like, really?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah. So I have to break it down for him.
Wait, that's what the OSHA consultant officer said. Said, oh, it's not.
Yeah. And so I'm sitting there. I'm a young kid. I'm 26 years old.
Right.
Not even 26. Yeah. Yeah. I'm in my early 20s. I'm running safety for 150 high hazard class incidents. But I like to learn stuff. I like to get in the details. I like to understand things.
Right.
I'm educating the consultant, the consultation division of OSHA in this area, and I'm like, this is ridiculous, man. You know?
Yeah.
And it just really set the stage for every time we interact. Our client up north, and they're getting cited for a sidewalk, and you're like, well, we have no jurisdiction over that. And right. There's municipal code, and there's you got to go out and do. We can't do that.
Yeah.
And so,
you literally don't have the legal right to do it.
Yeah, we don't have the legal right to do it. The judge agrees with us, and then OSHA like, you still got to do it, and you're like, it's not even our jurisdiction. And then, so you look at this and you go, well, why would these senators want to get rid of OSHA? Well, it's the same reason when feds came in and they said, hey, California, you're writing all these citations and you don't make any of them stick. Stop writing citations that don't stick.
Yeah.
And so then that's where that whole thing, if you have a false report, if you have a late report, you're not getting out of it because you should have done what you're supposed to do. But then you get these inspectors, and we have a guy that chops off his hand and his foot, and we get a $5,000 fine, and we have a slip and fall on our non-jurisdiction, and we get a $50,000 fine. How does that work?
Right.
So you're looking at it, and you're going, okay, but you're all over the place. Yeah, you need fall protection here and there. A ladder needs to be within touching distance. No, the standard's 25 feet. Like, do you know what you're talking about?
Yep.
And then you get the ones, you got to write hole on this board. It's not a floor. It's an excavation. Right. So that standard doesn't apply.
Doesn't apply.
Like, hello. So you do it to yourself, and this is a great lesson. Well, let me back up in my stance on the OSHA abolishment. I think, when you look at things that are frustrating, like the subjectivity of OSHA from inspector to inspector, judge to judge, district manager to district manager, it's very frustrating when you look at, hey, we get leeway here, but we don't get leeway here. This is interpreted this way or that way. So when you look at that, you go, yeah, I could see where you want to abolish it too. I don't think abolishing OSHA is a good thing. I think if you do that, you really open up the door for a lot of lack of safety requirements. Some states are going to be overly zealous, others are going to be doing nothing.
Right.
And I think as much as we would like to go, our people are smart enough to do the things that they're supposed to do, as we've seen in our previous podcast where we illustrate the lack of training and the lack of knowledge on employees' parts and to even save themselves from gas leaks and everything else. You go, no, you need some structure around this. And I think you need a governing body that provides structure. I would like to see OSHA stop fining public agencies. Like what I'd like to see them do is say, okay, you're in violation. You need to correct it. We give you 1 year to correct all this stuff. Then if you don't make the corrections, we'll issue
Then,
a
yeah,
citation. Right? I don't think burdening our taxpayers with citations is the right way to go. And I think helping public agencies address the thing that they need to is great. You want to still cite private entities, then okay, but I still think like, maybe there should be some assistance in that realm versus just a big flat citation. It just doesn't do anything. You know?
right,
and
right.
and again the subjectivity, so I can see why you want to do that, but the structure is needed, and the training requirements are needed, and someone needs to design that. If you get into it, like California will lock down everything that you do, and you
Yeah,
you will not have any business. I mean, we just talked to one of our clients, the DOT. Here's another prime example of that. Right
yeah.
here's the inconsistency. How did the firefighters get away with work, being on duty for so long and then, driving a rig? But if you're you're a company and you got laborers and you drive across state lines and you can only drive so many hours, 7 up to 70 hours working on duty and this, and you got to take 34 hours off and blah 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 and blah blah blah. So you're like, well, how does this work? Yeah, like what is it? So I can get in a car and I can drive across, like you and I, we could drive and work way more than 14 hours in a day, but we're not driving over 10,000 pounds, so we can crash into anybody we want and kill them. Like,
Right.
makes zero sense.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. Look, everything you said, I 100% agree with. Um, OSHA is necessary, but the sort of OSHA that is necessary isn't necessarily the OSHA that we have.
Yeah.
Having that structure in place, I think, is crucial. Just even to establish those minimum standards,
Yeah.
right? Right. Like I mentioned on another podcast, the 100 feet versus 75 feet on fire
Yeah.
extinguishers. Or how about the PELs for many hazardous chemicals? I always get the acronym wrong. ACGIH,
Yeah.
the chemical,
Yeah.
yeah, ACGIH, the chemical hygienist organization, have much more stringent
Right.
PELs for most chemicals than is currently in the OSHA standard, and that's fine if you incorporate those in and start to work your way through those. But it's important to have at least that minimum standard in place. So that's important. But I really
Well,
like the
that
direction you're going at it, Steve, with how OSHA should approach enforcement. That
yeah,
it really should be,
yeah.
yeah,
I
a
just
helping hand.
be a helping hand.
Yeah,
Help people. I mean, I don't know. That takes a lot of work away from the independent consultants and stuff. But I do think, you know, there's got to be there's got to be a little bit of time for people to abate hazards versus just pay the fines. And when you drive, like there's a conflict of interest there. When you drive your budget from citations, that's problematic because you're
yes,
incentivized to write more citations.
absolutely,
And I
absolutely.
think that there was that reason. I would like to see this come to OSHA as well, where you have You can't be the developer of the standards, the enforcer of the standards, and the judge, where you're judge, jury, and executioner all in one, and I think there needs to be some separation of that as well. Because again, a lot of times, yeah, the individuals who are ruling on these things, they need to fully understand what it is, but sometimes you feel like they're maybe a little more biased towards the OSHA enforcement agencies. I just think, who sets the penalties? Well, the OSHA district office sets penalties, and that just seems wrong.
Right.
So
Right.
I think more clarity, and I know clarity's been in the media a lot, and everyone says, "Oh, you need more clarity," but you do need more clarity. I need to be able to see things. Like, how do you arrive at this, right? Why do you arrive at this, and how do you argue? Like I was arguing on one, and it was triple citation on the same thing, and it's like this, you can't do that. Oh no, they're different. No, they're not. The same thing. And just arguing, and you're like, well, I'm proving we have the documentation right here. I said, nope, not good enough. Well, what is good enough then? If you say follow the manufacturer's instructions, and the manufacturers, those are the instructions, and I didn't write the instructions, we followed them. They're there for everyone to see. We tell them in the training. We have it listed here. It's not my fault that that's what you want to rely on, and then the
manufacturer didn't have very good instructions, right, or what.
or when they go, well, like the openings in walls, floors, and roofs, and having to write the word hole on it, our opening, do not remove.
Yeah, do not remove.
Yeah. One of our clients is like, this inspector saying we got to write hole. Well, that's not what the standard says. And so, but if you don't please this inspector, then you're going to get written up. And that's BS. And so then you look at that, and you start looking at it, and you go, well, we had a letter of interpretation from 1996 on that. And in there, they even say, well, OSHA didn't define floor. Well, why not? So we used the definition. Okay, so you used the definition. From which dictionary and which version, which year? You don't say. So if the definition of floor changes and you're working off of a working definition from a dictionary, is it Webster's? Is it this one? Which definition is it? Is it the AI definition of floor now? And so then how do you enforce that? Well, you have too much subjectivity in these things. And I just go like, So that being said, I think OSHA needs to stick around. There's fall protection updates. I like where they're heading with this kind of creation of a single standard, but then they go in and they screw it up with the pitch, and they say, yeah, any 0 to 7 and 12, regardless of height, you have to have fall protection. Well, what? I mean, we have some A-frames where the roof literally comes down to the ground. And you're like, so if I'm standing on the ground and I'm working on the roof, I have to have fall protection. What? But the way that's written is that's exactly what it means, right? Yes. If you got your feet on the ground, but you're working on the roof, meaning maybe I'm 6 foot, and I'm working at 5 foot, and I'm just standing there putting on a new shingle, I got to wear fall protection. And you could say, Steve, you're being ridiculous. No, I'm telling you what the standard reads and how that will be looked at by some inspectors.
Yep. That's the thing. When you have something like this, Steve, you hit upon it, because that's how these two topics in particular combine so well, because we have this element where OSHA has this judge, jury, executioner mindset, and they derive so much of their funding from citations, and your only recourse is to take them to court. and that's for a lot of companies, a lot of organizations. That's either not an option, or it's certainly a cost prohibitive option.
Yeah.
And and so you may even not want to fight them on it, but it gives them so much leeway, as you said, to be subjective about something and said, you know what, I don't like something else about here, but I can't really cite it, so I'm going to cite this to get these
Well,
guys.
they do that. They go back to the general duty clause and they go, oh yeah, general duty, general duty.
Yeah, yeah,
Hello.
right. It's all general duty.
Then why do you have a specific standard? Hello.
Right.
So I don't know. I want to say this because I think if you work for OSHA, you could really take away the wrong impression from Matt and I. I mean, I know a lot of consultation folks, being in ASSE and CSSSP, and you know, they're good people. And I can just remember, like, when the ATD standard came out, aerosol transmissible disease,
Right.
and it's been adopted, enforceable. And I said to the consultation folks, I said, hey, trying to understand this here as it relates to schools, because we have police and fire in some schools, or we have police departments in some schools, does it apply to them? And like, we haven't had training on it. It's 6 months out. Like, what do you mean you haven't had training on it?
Right.
But then
This is the consultation guys.
But then they'll cite you for not training, and you're like,
right.
Yeah, and you guys are the ones that are going out and enforcing. Like, nobody's had training on it yet. The standards come through. Well, it's already enacted, and
Right.
so, I feel for those guys because they're up against the wall too with all the stuff that happens in the world when it comes to training and education and employment and everything else. It's
Right.
just a hard one. But I also
There's an element to that too, Steve. Sorry to break in on you just real quick before you get to the next point. There's an element to that too, where let's say you go in there as a OSHA code enforcer, and maybe you let something ride a little bit. It's like, oh no, I'm not. I'm gonna let this go, and then a major incident happens
Right.
after that. Then they're
Right.
going to look back at that history. Hey, you visited this place.
Right.
Did
Yeah, it's
you
a
see?
catch-22. Then you feel responsible for things that happen. And I think that's where the overzealous piece comes in. And I think from our standpoint, when you start looking at this and you're like, no, we did what we're supposed to do around the standard. We did what we were supposed to do on the policy, on the training. We met all the requirements, and you're still citing us for it. We have to push back on that, especially when we know that we've done the things that we were supposed to do. And I think that's also challenging. And I don't know. You can't abolish OSHA. You just can't abolish OSHA. But we do have to get a little better structure around it, I think. And I know there's a lot of standards, but I think when people cite the wrong standards, when they're referencing things that aren't in there, completely making things up, I would say, are just simple misunderstandings of what it is. That really is illustrative of the point that they need a lot more training and a lot more knowledge. And,
yes, they do.
And it should be illustrative of the fact that the standards are just confusing.
They absolutely are. They're often contradictory.
Confusing. And if you're going to write this stuff, then write it with, if you have something that's pertinent to the definition floor, then define it in the standard. Yeah. So it's there. This whole confusion where safety guys are looking at an excavation out in a golf course and going, oh no, you got to write opening, do not remove on that.
Right.
It's for a different standard. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. you know, and then
This
you're in
is
an
why
argument.
every major standard has a sizable definition section.
Yeah, yeah,
That's why it's exactly for this purpose.
right. So anyway, this brings up another podcast idea that we need to do right away on another update. So with that being said, we do like OSHA. We don't want to see them go. I don't think they should go. I would love to see more refinement around some of these things as we evolve in OSHA standards and policy making and things of this nature. But if you do have any level of fall protection, make sure that you're updating your policy. If you need assistance with that, Matt and I are happy to help you with that. All of our clients who we've written these policies for are going to get the free update to make sure it's in compliance. So that's always part of our deal. You know, once we write it, it's pretty much lifetime updates on that, unless we have, you know, something really strange occur. But anyway,
Right.
let's if you're watching, you need to watch the next one if you're a public school, because there's been some major updates to that we need.
All right.